In a previous video we coupled the i5-13600K with budget DDR4 memory, a budget $20 CPU cooler, and a budget motherboard. And in that video, you guys wanted to see me test the Ryzen 7 5800X3D with a similar outfit. So if you are into getting the absolute best price performance, even on the high end, and coupling it with, say, an RTX 4090, how much performance are you going to be leaving on the table with this CPU? Well, there's only one way to find out, and that's to run the tests. Never pay full price for Windows 10 or 11 again. With today's video sponsor, SCD Keys, you can get activated for as little as $15 using that coupon, BFTYC. Links in the description below. Welcome back to Tech Yes City, and currently, the Ryzen 7 5800X3D can be had for a very similar price as the i5-13600K. But also when we check out the motherboard costs, I believe B550s in total as an average price are actually cheaper than B660 motherboards from Intel. So that's actually a plus for the 5800X3D over the 13600K. But in today's video, we are going to be using the same memory that we used with the i5-13600K. This is some DDR4 3600 MHz CL18. Of course, it's got a bit of RGB bling on it, but it's 4x8GB sticks. Then we've got a $25 AliExpress CPU cooler. This one is called the Wavibo. However, although it sounds dodgy, the performance is anything but. And then for the motherboard, we've got a B550 Tough Gaming from ASUS that we picked up on a used parts hunt for around $50. However, this motherboard is very important because it does blow me away with some of the results. However, before we get into those gaming numbers, we'll look at the temperatures with the budget CPU cooler and also some undervolting. Here's where out of the box on this motherboard, we managed to get 14,283 Cinebench R23 points, and this was clocking to 4.25 gigahertz all cores, and it was doing so with a maximum temperature of 86 degrees and using up about 118 watts. Of course, if you're using a really good water cooler, you could bring these temps and even power consumption down. But here's the magic of undervolting, where if you decide to undervolt this CPU, you can bring it down to 74 degrees with a very similar Cinebench R23 score and also drop the power consumption down to 106 watts. So undervolting 50 millivolts will take the edge off of this CPU, and it will also pretty much give you identical FPS in games. And also the single core performance is 4.55 gigahertz. So what we can see here with the X3D is that it's actually tuned quite well out of the box. It's ready to game, where the really only settings that I do recommend doing if you get this CPU is just lock in your XMP profiles in the BIOS and also undervolt at 50 millivolt. Well, we'll pull up the first gaming test that we did here at 1080p with Shadow of the Tomb Raider. And in fact, these numbers blew me out of my chair because it's the highest score I've ever seen in this title at 1080p. Here's where, with the out-of-the-box score, we got 344 average FPS, and then when we undervolted, we got 348 average FPS. And you guys might be thinking, Brian, that is absurd. I've never seen that high of a score in Shadow of the Tomb Raider. I'll just simply show you guys the actual result and benchmark on the screen so you can believe it with your own eyes, as I was shocked as well. And I tried to look into this result, why it was so much higher than even what I've tested in the past. And the only thing I could find was in ASUS's BIOS notes with the B550 Tough Gaming. They did do a specific update that did pay particular attention to the 5800X3D, and they said that they improved the performance. And I mean, they must have definitely improved the performance with this Shadow of the Tomb Raider title in the 5800X3D, because it's showing and it's actually beating any other CPU that I've tested in the past, the 7950X and also the 13900K with DDR5 6800 MHz and a $200 cooler. So it looks like the budget outfit is already scoring a massive victory, and this extends all the way through 1440p ultra settings and onto 4K ultra settings in this title too. Though if we move over to a game like Cyberpunk 2077, here's where at 1080p lower settings, we've got 182 average FPS, but at 1440p ultra settings, we've got over 150 average FPS, and at 4K, we've got some really good results here too, really not differing much from the norm. And then over to Horizon Zero Dawn, shows also at 4K, just like Cyberpunk, the differences between these CPUs are minimized as the workload on the GPU starts to get close to 100%. Though if we move down to 1440p, this is where the 5800X3D does start to stretch its legs a little bit, and then onto 1080p, it does score a massive victory here, just like Shadow of the Tomb Raider, but ironically enough, with this ASUS motherboard, it's actually coming close to that of the 7950X with expensive DDR5 memory, expensive motherboard, and expensive CPU cooler. So I thought that was really ironic and a twist in the whole equation here, where the 5800X3D is not only impressing, but it's impressing by a long shot. However, moving over to CSGO, this is where the 13600K does pull off a victory here. However, I do believe in this title, the 3D V-Cache technology that they're using with the X3D model doesn't really make a difference, as I've tested this game with the 5800X vanilla in the past, and they've virtually been the same scores between these two CPUs. In fact, the 5800X will be a little higher in FPS because it does go all-core clock a little bit higher than the X3D, especially in games. Though moving over to Far Cry 6, here's where we got a pretty impressive score with this budget DDR4 outfit, and this was at 1080p, 1440p, and 4K, coming close to that of the 13600K. The 13600K did edge it out in this title. Though we're going to quickly go back to the first title, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and show you guys those undervolting figures with the power consumption numbers. And here's with the RTX 4090 with the 50 millivolt undervolt. This was the sweet spot, giving us great FPS, but also saving power in the process and doing a better job in general than the 13600K, considering the FPS you're getting. So on the high end, I believe that the 5800X3D is not only giving out a great value experience for high performance gaming, but it's also giving out a very efficient one too, which makes this CPU a great option for someone looking to get into high-end PC gaming today. Though when it comes to fine-tuning the X3D, it's kind of like it's got a mind of its own. I couldn't really fine-tune the core clocks. I really could only change the voltage. And in fact, when I started to undervolt the CPU past 50 millivolt, for instance, if I took it to minus 87 millivolt, this is when the CPU started to downclock quite significantly, and the performance, say, for instance, in Cinebench was at 13,000 points. So it was a significant drop from that 14,000 score, and also dropped down to close to 100 watts. So it looks like out of the box, this thing has just been tuned for one profile only, and it sticks to that profile. And in fact, in Ryzen Master, there was no options to unlock this CPU and tune it within Windows either. So you are pretty limited with the Ryzen 7 5800X3D out of the box. Though I do, as always, with the latest CPUs coming out in 2022, and even the graphics cards, I do recommend undervolting to find that sweet spot. In this case, I believe it's around minus 50 millivolt. It's just gonna take the edge off the CPU, especially with a budget cooler and budget motherboard, and give you a great overall experience. Anyhow, guys, that's about it for the crux of this video. The 5800X3D, I do apologize for not giving you guys a video on it sooner. I've had to buy one of these months ago, actually, when I got the 7950X in. I had to buy this CPU because I wanted to include it in the benchmarks because I believe it was such an important CPU, and people were like, Brian, you got to give us a dedicated video on it. So I thought I would give you guys a dedicated video just testing it and really focusing on what it can pull off on the budget segment. And it really did impress me a whole lot. I think this CPU is the one to get for AM4, but also the 5600, the Ryzen 5 5600, I believe the Ryzen 5 5500. They're two really good CPUs as well to consider. And especially if you want to save even more money, you can go for things like a B450 and just use the included box cooler on those two CPUs. So AMD really have some great options right now for not just entry-level PC gaming, but also mid-range and high-end without spending that flagship price. Say, for instance, like the 7950X or the 13900K. Those CPUs and also the associated costs you need to get those CPUs running well is actually a lot higher than what you can get this thing running for today. Now, in terms of versus the 13600K, that's a very interesting comparison because one will do, in my opinion, multitasking or especially productivity work better just by looking at that Cinebench score, which is the 13600K. But also the 5800X3D, I believe, is just got a cheaper outfit in total, and it does give out a really easy to tune out of the box experience that you're going to love if you're gaming. So I would give the edge to gaming slightly at this point in time with all the current pricing to the 5800X3D, but I would give the all-round win to the i5-13600K. So they're both phenomenal choices. I think you cannot go wrong with either or, and that really is in itself an awesome recommendation. When I can say that, that means you are getting, as the end user, good value for money from both companies. The final point that I will touch on, because I believe it is valid and it's worth mentioning, is that the Ryzen 7 5800X3D is currently the best gaming CPU on AM4, and it's going to be the best gaming CPU on AM4 indefinitely, which means if you go out and buy a B550 motherboard and DDR4 memory in the CPU cooler, you're not going to have any other upgrade options in the future for gaming unless you go over to AM5, and that's going to have a lot more expenses associated with it. Sure, there is the Ryzen 9 5950X with 16 cores, 32 threads, but that does have a different caching structure. That's why in a lot of games, it does give out not just more FPS, but a much better 0.1% low experience, which actually did blow me away about this CPU. It was very good. As opposed to the 13600K, we at least know that you've got the i9 13900K that you could just slot in the future and get an upgrade in that manner. Anyhow, guys, I hope you enjoyed the delayed hybrid review focus on the Ryzen 7 5800X3D. If you did, then be sure to hit that like button for us. Also, let us know in the comments section below, what do you think of both this CPU and the i5-13600K? Which one would you go for personally and why? Love reading your thoughts and opinions as always, just like this question of the day here. And this comes from Charles York, and they asked, do you know where I can get a $1,600 RTX 4090? They lasted 4 days at retailers on launch and are only $2,200 online now. Suggestions. So at the moment they're sold out. I think it shocked pretty much everyone in the industry how quickly a $1,600 USD graphics card sold out in the middle of a recession. So that's certainly not going to help you trying to obtain a card at $1,600. So if you wanted to get one of these cards, at least from the research I've done here, if you go on, for instance, B&H Photos, you can join the email list to get notified as soon as the cards are back in stock at $1,600. Then you can snag one up as soon as the opportunity comes around. Though in terms of paying $2,200, do not entertain those prices. Just be a little bit patient. These cards will come back in stock. Do not fear. There's no crypto mining boom going on right now. In fact, it's the opposite. The whole crypto sector is literally collapsing by the day as these exchanges go broke. So miners aren't too keen to get their hands on these graphics cards. Sure, there is a little bit of scalping, though the scalpers will realize during these times where money is starting to tighten, they may find themselves sitting on a loss. So hopefully the scalpers get what they deserve too, but just join those mailing lists, be patient, and you'll get a card when they come up at MSRP. Hope that answers that question, and I'll catch you in another tech video very soon. Peace out for now, and if you've stayed this far, be sure to hit that sub button, ring that bell to get the tech videos as soon as they drop, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.